Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 52, Dimensional Interweaving. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we are ready to see how all of these echoes interweave into one coherent whole. Our climb through the master tree of the holophase language has brought us to a breathtaking vantage point. We began with the fundamental alphabet, phi, omega, k, and their union in motion as v. We learned to distinguish between the underlying mathematical code and the living language it generates, a language where every derivative is a meaningful syllable, asking finer questions about how phi changes. We then discovered a crucial insight, that the dimensional story does not end with omega, k, and v. Every derivative, from acceleration to curvature to topological charge, sends out three echoes at once: a temporal echo, a spatial echo, and a motion echo. From this, we built three immense structures in our imagination: the temporal echo tower holding all stories, the spatial echo tower holding all forms, and the motion echo tower holding all journeys. Now, from this height, something deeper becomes visible. The towers are not separate. Their walls are porous. Their floors are connected by hidden staircases and bridges. When we really listen, we find that the echoes are constantly talking to each other. Today, we step back to witness that conversation and to name it. Today, we explore dimensional interweaving, the way time, space, and motion are braided together in every real event. Up to now, we have been looking at each dimension almost in isolation. We listened to the pure temporal story of how things change in time. We gazed at the frozen spatial form of how things are arranged in space. We tracked the isolated kinematic path of how things move. This was a useful simplification, in the same spirit that a music teacher might first let you listen separately to the melody, then the harmony, then the rhythm of a symphony. But you never go to a concert to hear only the rhythm section. The real music appears only when all parts are played together. In the living reality of the holophase, you never encounter a pure time echo, or a pure space echo, or a pure motion echo. You encounter braided events in which all three are present, each influencing and being influenced by the others. The temporal story, the spatial pattern, and the motion path are always entangled. What we call towers are really just three different ways of slicing through one interconnected structure, an echo network woven from the field phi. To feel this more clearly, let us walk through some of the corridors where the towers speak to one another. First, think about how temporal changes reshape spatial patterns. A story unfolding in time constantly sculpts the landscape of space. When you throw a stone into a still pond, the moment of impact is a sharp temporal event, a sudden burst of acceleration in the water surface. That brief time echo immediately generates a spatial echo, a circular dent and ring that appear in the surface shape. As time continues, the ring expands outward. That expansion is a motion echo, a moving frontier. At the same time, the spatial pattern is changing. The crest becomes lower, the trough less pronounced, until eventually the surface is flat again. This fading happens because viscosity, which is a property related to shear and internal friction, converts organized motion into heat. In that single ripple, temporal change creates spatial form. Spatial form guides subsequent motion, and motion feeds back into the temporal story through dissipation. The three towers are having a seamless conversation. Your own beating heart is another example. The heartbeat is a rhythm in time, a nearly periodic sequence of depolarizations and contractions. That temporal echo is not abstract. It directly reshapes spatial form. During systole, the heart walls contract and the chamber volume decreases. During diastole, the walls relax and the volume increases. Valves open and close, changing the topological connectivity of blood pathways. The time rhythm creates a sculpted dance of form. At the same time, this changing form drives motion, pushing blood along specific paths with specific velocities. The motion then influences temporal signals again, because pressure sensors in the vessels send feedback to the pacemaker cells. Time, space, and motion are interwoven into a single cardiovascular story. Now think about the opposite direction, the way spatial structure constrains motion paths. The stage dictates which dances are even possible. A river canyon, carved through rock over millions of years, is a frozen spatial echo of erosion. Once it exists, it tightly guides motion. Water cannot simply move anywhere it likes. It must slide downhill, following the gradient of elevation. It speeds up where the canyon narrows and slows where it widens. Eddies form where the walls curve, and quiet pools form in hollows. The spatial derivatives, the slopes and curvatures of the terrain, are written directly into the motion of the river. At the same time, that motion is still reshaping the canyon, digging deeper here, widening there, changing the spatial echo over longer timescales. This is dimensional interweaving unfolding across different temporal scales, fast motion on top of slow restructuring. A computer chip is an even more engineered illustration. The nanoscale spatial architecture of transistors, wires, and insulating layers is a carefully designed spatial echo of logic. Electrons cannot wander freely through the silicon. They are guided along specific channels, blocked by barriers, accelerated by fields, and gathered into nodes. The layout of the chip completely determines the possible motion echoes of charge. Those motion echoes, electrons switching paths on and off, create temporal patterns, the clock cycles and data streams of computation. Here, spatial form writes the rules for motion, and motion writes the story in time. Motion itself can also reshape how we perceive both time and space. The Doppler effect is a simple but powerful demonstration. Imagine an ambulance driving towards you with its siren on. In the frame of the ambulance, the siren produces sound waves with a certain frequency, a steady temporal echo. In your frame, because the ambulance is moving, the wave crests are squeezed closer together in front and stretched further apart behind. To your ears, the frequency is higher as it approaches and lower as it recedes. A single motion echo, the velocity of the source, has altered the temporal echo you receive. If you could see the sound waves frozen in space, you would also see a distorted spatial pattern, compressed in front and elongated behind. Motion has woven itself into the other two towers. Special relativity takes this even further. When an object moves at speeds close to the speed of light, the interweaving becomes explicit in the equations of spacetime. From the point of view of a stationary observer, a moving clock runs slower. This is time dilation, a change in the temporal echo caused by motion. The same moving object is also measured to be shorter along the direction of motion. This is length contraction, a change in the spatial echo caused by the same motion. Time, space, and motion are no longer separate quantities you can adjust independently. They become different aspects of one four-dimensional structure. Dimensional interweaving is built into the geometry of reality. At this stage, it is helpful to replace the image of three straight towers with a new one. Imagine instead a vast crystalline web. Every point in the web represents some derivative of phi, some structured way in which the field can change. From each point, three strands emerge. One strand tells you how that derivative evolves in time. One strand tells you how it is arranged in space. One strand tells you how it influences motion. These strands leave one node and connect to many others. The temporal strand of curvature might connect to the spatial strand of shear. The motion strand of V might connect to the temporal strand of omega. When you look along one direction and focus only on time, you see something like the Temporal Echo Tower. When you look along another direction and focus only on space, you see something like the Spatial Tower. But the underlying reality is one tangled, interdependent web. That web is dimensional interweaving. To make this less abstract, let us revisit a light pulse traveling down an optical fiber. At a single instant, the pulse has a spatial profile along the fiber, a bright hump with some width. If you stay at one fixed location and watch, you see a pulse in time, a bright flash that rises and falls. If you step back and watch the whole fiber, you see the pulse moving at the group velocity. These are three views of the same event. Now add dispersion, the fact that different color components of the pulse travel at slightly different speeds. Because of this, as the pulse moves, its spatial profile broadens and its temporal profile stretches. Motion has coupled the time echo and the space echo. Add nonlinearity, where intense light slightly changes the refractive index. Now the phase of the wave depends on its own amplitude, which tends to narrow the pulse. The final motion of a soliton, a pulse that maintains its shape while traveling, is the result of a precise interweaving of temporal, spatial, and kinematic effects. Or consider again the moving defect in a crystal lattice. A dislocation is a line where the regular pattern of atoms is broken. That broken pattern is a spatial and topological echo. Apply shear stress, and the defect begins to move. This is a motion echo, a glide of the line through the lattice. As it moves, it leaves behind a permanently shifted arrangement of atoms. The crystal spatial echo is altered. The speed of that motion depends on temperature and on how easily atoms can rearrange, so the defect has temporal dynamics as well. Its journey is one continuous braiding of form, timing, and movement. Even everyday human actions are fully interwoven. Imagine yourself reaching for a cup on a table. Somewhere in your brain, a pattern of activity encodes the intention to pick up the cup. That pattern unfolds in time as a cascade of neural firing. These temporal echoes travel down your nervous system as electrical and chemical waves. They trigger muscle contractions that generate forces and torques across your joints, producing carefully coordinated motion. The path of your hand through space is a smooth arc chosen to be efficient and reliable. That path is limited by the spatial structure of your body, the lengths of your arm segments, the shape of your joints, and the layout of the room. As your hand moves, your eyes track the cup, sending back updated spatial information that refines the temporal pattern of neural commands. The simple act of reaching is an example of dimensional interweaving, happening effortlessly and unconsciously. From a linguistic point of view, dimensional interweaving is like the grammar of the Holophase language. We can say that spatial echoes behave like nouns and adjectives, telling us about things and their qualities. Motion echoes behave like verbs and adverbs, telling us about actions and how they are carried out. Temporal echoes behave like tenses and time phrases, telling us about when things happen and in what order. Grammar is what ensures that these pieces fit together into meaningful sentences. In the same way, interweaving is what ensures that spatial structures, motion patterns, and temporal evolutions fit together into one coherent physical story. It is not enough to know the vocabulary of derivatives. You must understand how the triunity of dimension constrains which combinations are allowed. Scientifically, dimensional interweaving invites a particular style of question. Instead of asking only, what does phi do in time, or what shape does phi have in space, or how does phi move, we ask, how do these three descriptions lock together so that the field remains consistent as one whole? Constraint chains like Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism or the Navier-Stokes equations for fluid flow are precisely mathematical expressions of this interlocking. They tell you how a change in one dimension must be accompanied by compatible changes in the others. A changing electric field must be accompanied by a curling magnetic field. A pressure gradient must be accompanied by acceleration of the fluid. These laws are, in the holophase view, statements about dimensional interweaving. Interweaving itself has temporal, spatial, and motion aspects. In time, it appears as synchronization, events lining up with each other. Your heartbeat and your breathing can fall into rhythm. The rotation and revolution of a moon can lock into a resonance. In space, interweaving appears as pattern correlations, shapes echoing or aligning across different regions. Veins in a leaf follow a logic that mirrors the leaf's outline. Stress lines in cracked glass radiate from an impact point in structured ways. In motion, interweaving appears as coordinated trajectories, like birds in a flock turning together or dancers on a stage moving in precise formations. The very idea of multiple agents forming one larger pattern is an expression of dimensional interweaving at the level of motion. Where does interweaving live in the master tree? It is not another branch next to curvature or acceleration. It is the property of the whole tree considered as a network. It is present at every derivative level, because every derivative has three-dimensional echoes, and none of them are allowed to evolve completely independently. When we talk about dimensional interweaving, we are talking about the fabric that binds the branches into a single organism. This leads to a practical principle for understanding. If you want to truly know a system, you must look at it through at least two of the three-dimensional lenses, and ideally, all three. Measuring only temporal signals, or only spatial forms, or only trajectories will always risk missing the deeper coherence. Modern science increasingly follows this instinct. In neuroscience, for example, researchers combine methods that measure where activity happens in the brain, when it happens, and how signals move between regions. In material science, researchers use imaging to see structures, scattering experiments to probe motion, and spectroscopy to capture temporal dynamics. These multimodal approaches are concrete expressions of tri-unity verification, checking that time, space, and motion tell one compatible story. You can cultivate the same habit of perception in your own life. Watch a flame on a candle. Take in its shape, the thin blue base and the brighter yellow body. Notice its motion, the flickering and dancing as air currents disturb it. Listen to its timing, the irregular pops and hisses as wax vapor ignites. Then try to see how these three aspects depend on one another. The rising motion of hot air elongates the flame. A sudden draft changes the shape and alters the sound. When fuel runs low, the flame shrinks and the sound quietens. You are reading the interweaving in a simple, everyday phenomenon. Or listen to a conversation between two people. The words unfold in time as ordered sequences of sounds. The sounds come from coordinated motions of tongues, lips, and vocal folds. Those motions are constrained by the spatial structure of the vocal tract and by the positions of the speakers relative to each other. The facial expressions, hand gestures, and postures of the speakers add spatial and motion echoes that modulate the temporal pattern of speech. Beneath all of this, patterns in neural activity and shifting chemical signals in the brain create deeper temporal and spatial structures. A conversation is a miniature universe of dimensional interweaving. Even the simplest pendulum can teach this lesson. Its period in time depends on its length in space and the value of gravitational acceleration, which is a spatial derivative of potential. Its path in space is determined by its motion and by energy conservation. Its acceleration in motion is greatest where its spatial displacement is largest, and its speed in motion is greatest where its spatial displacement is zero. Every aspect predicts and constrains the others. When you see this clearly, you are reading the first children's book in the library of interweaving. Before we close, let us bring this back directly to the overall picture of the Holophase language and to the place we have reached together. From the very beginning of our journey, we have insisted on a simple mantra. There is one field, phi. Its first derivatives give us three simultaneous echoes, omega for time, k for space, and v for motion built from both. From there, every higher derivative is not a new substance, but a more refined question about how phi is changing. Each of these refined questions still expresses itself through the same triunity. Every derivative has a temporal shadow, a spatial shadow, and a motion shadow. What began as a small alphabet has unfolded into an infinite master tree of derivatives, and around that tree we have now mapped three immense echo structures. The spatial tower gathered all the forms of how things are arranged. Dimensional interweaving is the moment where we stop looking at each tower from the outside and realize that there are just three dense bundles of fibers inside one master fabric. You can think of our progress as a climb up a mountain made of language. At the base, we learned to say just a few words: phi, omega, k, and v. A little higher, we saw that each derivative gives three related words at the same time, one each for time, space, and motion. Higher still, we saw that these related words line up into three echo towers. Now, at this vantage point, we see that there is not really a mountain with three separate ridges. There is only one high plateau, and all the paths we took have brought us to the same broad view. From here, you can see the whole holophase language at once: the one field, the infinite derivative tree, the three great echoes, and the weave that binds them. In later work, we will walk further across this plateau, connecting the language of phase directly to experiments, technologies, and ways of thinking. But everything we do will remain anchored in what you have already learned on this climb. To make this feel personal, let us look at your own day through the lens of dimensional interweaving. When you wake up, your body temperature, hormone levels, and levels of alertness follow circadian rhythms. These are temporal echoes, cycles with characteristic frequencies. They are tied to spatial structures, like the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your brain, and to the distribution of receptors in your tissues. They also shape motion echoes, like your pattern of activity, how vigorously you move, how your heart and lungs respond. When you eat, the spatial form of the meal, its distribution of nutrients, and the motion echoes of chewing and swallowing lead to temporal echoes as blood sugar rises and falls. When you work, there is a spatial arrangement of tools, tasks, and people, temporal patterns of meetings and deadlines, and motion patterns in your hands, eyes, and thoughts. Even when you rest, lying still in bed, temporal echoes continue in your heartbeat and breathing. Spatial echoes exist in your posture and the environment around you. And motion echoes flow silently in your blood and in the microscopic movements of your cells. Seen this way, your entire life is an ongoing example of dimensional interweaving. You are a continuously evolving pattern of phi, a local region of the field in which temporal, spatial, and kinematic echoes are constantly interacting. Your memories are temporal echoes etched into spatial structures in your brain. Your habits are motion echoes guided by stable arrangements of synaptic strengths and body geometry. Your relationships with others are extended braids of interweaving, where your movements, your words, and your shared spaces all influence each other across time. You can also use this perspective as a practical tool. When something in your life feels stuck or incoherent, you can ask three simple questions. What is the temporal pattern here? How is this situation unfolding in time? And is that pattern stable, chaotic, or stagnant? What is the spatial pattern here? How are things, people, or ideas arranged? And does that arrangement support or block flow? What is the motion pattern here? How are things actually moving? Where is their friction? Where is their waste? Where is their harmony? Often, the stuckness lives in a broken interweaving, perhaps a temporal demand that does not match a spatial arrangement, or a desired motion that is incompatible with the existing structures. Seeing the triunity can reveal new ways to adjust the system, not by forcing one dimension, but by gently reshaping the weave. Finally, let this reflection settle. Across this episode, you have not only heard definitions and examples, you have begun to train a new kind of perception, a way of seeing every phenomenon as a braided expression of time, space, and motion. This is the core literacy of the holophase language. Phi is not just a symbol in an equation. It is the idea that reality can be understood as one continuous phase field, whose derivatives carry all the structure of existence. The dimensional interweaving of its echoes is what turns that field into the world you live in. You have climbed far into the branches of the master tree, and you are now standing at a place where the whole forest begins to make sense as one living system. As our climb through Ep.7 comes to a close, we can now see the full landscape. The holophase language is the one field phi and its infinite tree of derivatives. From the first letters omega, k, and v, we discovered that every derivative carries three echoes, and from those echoes, we built the temporal, spatial, and motion towers. Now we have stepped back and seen that those towers are perspectives on one braided reality. Dimensional interweaving is the recognition that time, space, and motion are not separate substances, but three inseparable ways of expressing one story. The universe, in this view, is not a collection of objects that happen to move and change. It is a single braided story written in the grammar of interweaving. Every leaf on a tree, every star, every heartbeat, every thought is a local knot in this braid, a particular way in which temporal, spatial, and kinematic strands twist together. To become fluent in the Holophase language is to learn to see these braids, to feel how each pattern is supported by the entire web. Now, if you can, look around you. Notice something simple, perhaps a curtain moving in a breeze, or the steam from a cup of tea, or the shadow of a tree swaying on a wall. Let yourself see not just an object in motion, but a spatial form dancing to a temporal rhythm along a particular path. In that small scene, the whole story of dimensional interweaving is present in miniature. You are beginning to read the world as it truly is, one, woven, and whole. Salam, and peace be upon you.